Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Making Things Work podcast. My name's Duncan Prior and I'm the host of the podcast, and I help organizations make use of technology to simplify and transform their organizations and to make work better. In this podcast series, we discuss topics around digital transformation and leadership in the workplace, and we've started this series discussing sustainability in its truest sense of the word. And that's because the subject of sustainability is moving beyond what has been up until now grouped together under a ESG banner, environmental, social and governance umbrella. It's just something much more fundamental, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So today our guest is Tereze Gaille, who's a technical architect with MuleSoft. Hi there, Tereze.
Hi, good morning, good evening.
How are you?
Doing very well indeed.
Yes, so this is something of a first for the Making Things Work podcast. Tereze has recently moved to New Zealand. So how is the move? How is the move going, Tereze?
Yeah, really well so far. I think the hardest thing was transitioning from summer in the UK, and in August, of course, we had those crazy heat waves, and going to winter. So even got to do some skiing when I first moved over here. But now going back into spring. So yeah, and it's been really, really fantastic exploring a new part of the world and just seeing everything that New Zealand has to offer.
Yes, when I lived abroad, I often found that one of the challenges is there is a lot of paperwork when you move abroad, isn't there? And overcoming the admin can sort of, if you're not careful, detract from just the pure enjoyment of being there.
Fortunately, admin wasn't too bad. I think, especially with borders opening, they're just really keen and excited to get people back again, especially people in specific professions, so tech, healthcare sector, and so forth. So fortunately, the admin wasn't too bad. I feel like it's definitely doesn't outweigh the benefits.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to ask you, obviously you've been on this sort of journey to get to New Zealand, and then obviously your career is taking you in a particular direction. You're a technical architect and also a speaker, evangelist on sustainability. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you've come to this point where you seem to be really, you seem to have really kind of discovered your why, as it were.
I think a lot of people go into sustainability for a number of different reasons. I think for me personally, it was something that was always close to my heart. I did care, and I still do care, about looking after the earth and being good guardians and things like that. But I think for me, the fundamental change was once I started looking at literature and content that no longer looked at if we do this, we can save the earth. It started talking about we are causing irreversible breakdown. How do we adapt? What does that mean for society? What does that mean for our ecosystems? And once I saw that change from what scientists and the wider literature was saying, it really made me stop and think so it has to be part of everything. Your day to day, at work, personal life, in society, sustainability has to be embedded at every single layer. So it really made me think, well, what do I do? You know, well, one, there was already a lot of things I was doing in my personal life, but I didn't really see a link into what I could do at work. So this is when I started thinking, like, hey, technology, of course, is looked at something as a great saver, and there's a lot of hope is pinned on what technology can do from a solution perspective and be really the catalyst for change. But it's not just technology, right? It's also systematic change, it's education, it's like so solving sustainability is a multifaceted problem. You have to tackle it at every end. But that's my journey into how I started thinking about what can I do in my day job and within my own sphere of influence to make a difference.
Yes, you very much come at it from that angle, then, as opposed to many people will be you're in your job, and then the company itself is taking leaps towards becoming more sustainable. You've just joined those two things together.
Yeah, for me, so I guess another interesting thing to note is so MuleSoft is a Salesforce company. So of course, Salesforce has really, really fantastic credentials, and it's been a trailblazer in its own right in tackling sustainability. But I can talk about that later on. But MuleSoft, funnily enough, especially when I joined, didn't seem to have that much specifically that it was driving from a sustainability perspective. It felt like a lot of the really, truly fantastic work we were getting from Salesforce. Of course, from that level, we were, there were initiatives and all kinds of different things. But for me, I was like, well, surely there's more we can be doing as MuleSoft. Surely there's a good opportunity, be it from, increasing awareness of our own employees to like really thinking outside the box, how our technology and platform can be used to help different companies as well, and the kinds of different challenges from sustainability perspective it can solve. So this is where I saw, you know, if you will, as my calling to really get stuck and to really see where we can take this.
Yes, because I think there's, we'll come on to talking about MuleSoft and what it does and how it does it at the moment. But I think it's fascinating that we're both in the business of sort of helping companies to transform and to make work better. And the interesting thing is how a lot of technology it's getting more easy to actually connect systems and help companies transform through technology. But I always think that the interesting part is the human bit, and I think there's two parts of that, which is people are enabled to do sort of more valuable work, and then the other part to it is then people say in our roles we have to do a lot more now than just evangelizing a particular piece of technology. It has to be much more fundamentally sort of connected to what a company does, and I see with what you're doing by connecting the work you do at MuleSoft with sustainability is a fantastic example of that in action.
Exactly right. And if you look at any large organization, pretty much every single one of them has made some kind of commitment, either to being net zero by 2035 or 2030, or having sustainable supply chains, or reducing the amount of plastic it's creating, or adopting more circular economy. Every large organization has something around that space. So the question is, how do we help? How do we help them get there? And also, especially looking at other parts of the wider ecosystem, so your governments and your public sector, these are typically organizations or parts do have set targets, but perhaps aren't getting there fast enough. Or, and this is where there's a real opportunity to come in and say, hey, we can help. This is how we can help. It's a little bit of, as you said, exactly, understanding their wider vision, what's important to them, what's, linked into their climate and sustainability aspirations, but also showing how we can help and making it easier for them as well. So not just saying, here's a product that can do it, but are there things like accelerators or really understanding where their pain points are? So for example, it's amazing when we talk to, you know, technologists understand what MuleSoft does. So like, it's a fantastic integration platform. We can connect all kinds of different systems. We know we can ingest files. We know we can do this and so forth. But sustainability teams have no idea, right? So the magic really happens when you combine those teams together and you're like, hey, you're already spending weeks crunching data in spreadsheets, looking at all the different sources, manually going to your suppliers, or looking at the whole organization, the whole value chain, and bit by bit putting all that data together. This is where MuleSoft can come in, and especially if that technology team or IT department already have MuleSoft, this is where the real power comes, linking them together and showing how we can help.
Yes, and so let's talk a bit more about how you've obviously over the last few years there's been you've been advocating for the topic of sustainability in the way that MuleSoft is sort of engages with its customers. And we talked a bit before about some of the hits and misses and the ups and downs and the way you've had to sort of work through to then arrive at the maybe I guess at the point you're just at now.
Yeah, and in all honesty, it's a little bit push and pull, right? The customer doesn't know what they don't know. And also, I can't invest time unless customer wants it. So you
Yes.
have this really fun problem of how do we show them what's possible while also, it's the right time. Because again, depending on what industry you look at, for some, especially having just come out pandemic, a lot of organizations have, their priorities have changed. Not saying that sustainability is not important, but there might be something on the short term that's very, very pressing, and they're just trying to, um, you know, stay stay in business for that matter. Um, but what I found is you always come across organizations or individuals in organizations for whom it's really core to who they are, and they bring that, so they're in a very similar space. So sometimes being, coming across those individuals. So again, one example, when I spoke at our biggest, annual conference in Europe, Connect, we had a sustainability breakout, and just from on the back of that session, we had enterprise architects or other technologists coming and getting in touch saying, hey, I've actually started thinking about what my, not just as an organization, but what also my IT teams can do to be better, or how we can contribute to our organization sustainability goals. So, be it maybe it's carbon reduction, maybe it's something else, maybe it's helping with quite novel use cases. What can we do? And that's where it's incredibly exciting because it gives me an opportunity to get deep into a specific industry, a specific use case, and give them our best around thought leadership, what we got already. And this is where, you evolving something that's quite novel and new, because everyone's still figuring out. It's a constantly evolving area of work.
Yeah. So let's. I thought maybe the next thing could be a good thing to do would be to sort of rattle off a few stats around sort of where we are, because one of the challenges is that particularly with cloud technologies, there's uses a lot of electricity. So technology becomes sort of part of the solution, but also part of the problem. Are there any sort of stats you've got at your fingertips to talk about the sort of the bad side, if you like, and how much electricity is being used by computers in the world?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call it the bad side. It's just being more mindful of the effects, and also
Yes.
as technology scales and grows, it's, well, how do we get more output per every kilowatt, hour of energy that we use? But something that might be very surprising to people is we hear aviation sector getting quite a bad reputation from time to time because there's,
Yeah.
a lot of carbon emissions emitted and so forth. But actually, if you compare it to the wider information and technology sector, you know, aviation was 2%, ICT was 4% in terms of carbon emissions. And that's something people sometimes not aware, especially now, as so many, even within a company or your own personal life, so many things are moving to the cloud. And it's
Yeah.
this abstract space, or it's just not a problem, it's just somewhere. And we often forget that it has a real impact, to run or host your data in the cloud. It's, of course, these data centers need energy, they need to be cooled, of course, even for the data to, from that data center location to your phone has to make multiple hops and, go through networking infrastructure. So of course all of this adds. And the question is also, how clean is the energy grid? So, again, depending on where that data is hosted, it can massively vary. So, of course, if it's using renewable energy, that carbon intensity tends to be quite low. But then, of course, if the wind is not blowing or sun is not shining, that again changes the picture. And another thing just to call out is, so there are quite crazy numbers in terms of estimations of how big the ICT or the digital landscape will be. Some say by 2030, 21% of all electricity consumption will be by this sector. So again, it's just acknowledging the fact running these digital services and technology does have a real cost, not just financial, but also environmental. And then if we are growing as much, especially with technologies like artificial intelligence or machine learning or blockchain is also one that gets quite, is quite resource intensive. So as those technologies scale, what do you do to make them as green as possible? So yeah, that's something that I'm really interested in. Another thing, just coming back to cloud, I went to a conference about year and a half ago, and this stat absolutely blew my mind. They were talking about how a lot of organizations maybe have data on premise, and their approach is just shift and lift to the cloud.
Yes.
But only 32% of data ever created is used. So there's a whole just masses of data that's sitting doing nothing. One probably didn't need to be created. If it did, maybe it's already outlived that purpose and should be, retired or cleared, according to its retention policy and so forth. And that also made me really think because when I work with different companies, that is one thing. Even from a logging perspective, do you need to be logging everything? What should you be
Yeah.
logging to make your life easier, but also not to have, thousands of, um, you know, bytes or gigabytes of storage used up?
Yes, I mean, one of the things we're talking about where I'm working at the moment is to thinking about actionable insights and figuring out what they are first, and then organizing the data accordingly. I think lots of times there's this sort of data collection exercise that goes on, and in the end, as you say, it surprised me though just how little of it gets used. I didn't appreciate it was like that. So I think the next thing would be quite interesting to do, because MuleSoft then becomes quite an interesting example, because if you talked about blockchain and various AI tools, you can imagine those being particularly sort of data hungry. But then MuleSoft is an interesting sort of platform, and quite difficult to connect to necessarily how it can help companies become more sustainable. So should we just start by just having a quick few minutes on what MuleSoft does and how it helps companies?
Yeah, brilliant. Quick thing just to add there. About 2 years ago, when we started saying MuleSoft has a role to play around sustainability, it's actually
Yeah.
quite critical. Even internally, we had people turn around like, "Hey, MuleSoft and sustainability doesn't go in the same sentence. What do you
No.
mean?" And again, even for people internally, it was quite
Right.
abstract. They're like, "Well, how does it actually help?" So for people who are not aware of MuleSoft, essentially we're a integration platform. So anything from data, systems, APIs, wherever it resides. So maybe it's on premise, maybe it's in the cloud, maybe it's a SaaS application. Our real superpower is able to connect all of that together in a really easy way. So of course, our product keeps evolving so that, we cater for a whole host of different personas. So be it more your technical and IT teams who can, maybe used to be Java developers, there's part of the platform that caters for that, but also for your business, more business admins, those type of personas, or as we call them, citizen integrator, just being able to look into an interface and connecting, making those integrations as well. Also, the crux of it is for anything, if you look at any organization, I think it's something like for a single transaction and you're like a typical, let's say you're buying something online and it's going to be delivered, it can pass through 35 systems. So when you think about it, for really large organizations, they need to have those systems connected up, and to have it, information flow from A to B to C and so forth. Also, that information is really critical to get insight. And Duncan, this comes back bit back to your point around, well, we need to know before we implement any kind of measure so we can track how well we're doing. So this is exactly where MuleSoft can come in. So one easy example we can think about is carbon reporting. So especially due to regulatory change, or just for your organization stakeholders, you need to have that information. across your scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, what are your emissions? What are you doing to reduce them? But of course, if before you talk about how you're going to reduce them, you need to have that data. And this is where somewhere MuleSoft is really well placed to help. So for example, perhaps you're looking at your buildings and the energy consumption or the electricity bill. Something like that could be ingested in, and then you can use your tool or platform for that calculation of okay, electricity converted into actual carbon based on whatever framework you use. Similarly with suppliers. So typically for organizations, majority of your emissions come from your supply chain. I think again it's between 60 to over 70%. So it's a huge, huge proportion, especially for Salesforce. Because if you think about it, our products are essentially, cloud products. So that's our unique offering. So when we look at, our cloud providers and other things, or for our offices, majority of the missions are in scope 3 and come from supply chain. So again,
Yeah.
even having data that you can ingest from your suppliers around, the kind of products or how far it's traveled, or for some they're even able to actually give you like that associated emissions. So like getting, having that single view of all of your carbon emissions, and being able to integrate it real time or near to real time is really, really where MuleSoft shines.
Yeah, fascinating, and it's interesting how, like you say, a company could do all the work it could internally, but if its own sort of suppliers and to some extent customers, if they're not doing the same things, then the whole enterprise of trying to achieve net zero doesn't really mean anything, because there's so many links in the chain. It's fascinating how the Salesforce net zero sort of product helps people connect with their suppliers, as well as just doing your own internal best efforts to try and get yourself to net zero.
Exactly. And something else that is really wonderful about Salesforce, we want to take our suppliers on that journey. So even when we're interacting and communicating with our own suppliers, we tell them about the sustainability exhibit, which essentially
Yeah,
says, for us, we've set science-based targets. We want to be in line with a 1.5 degrees Celsius future and make sure that global warming doesn't exceed that. And this is what we're doing. But for suppliers, this is equally important. So we work together with our suppliers to show them how they can set science-based targets and
yeah,
really help them identify where they can also reduce their emissions. Because again, there's is yes, looking within your own walls is good and making sure that you doing everything you can, but ultimately that's not what's going to move the needle. You have to
yeah,
look beyond that, look at the wider industry and looking at every organization. And it's typically the ones that will struggle the most, where the biggest opportunity is, where we can come in and help. And again, net zero cloud is really fantastic as one. We also can help get that data in. So wherever the sources are, so be it your suppliers, be it, your energy or electricity records, travel, so forth. But what it does is it has all of that calculation. So it pulls in latest data sets, so those conversion factors, and it does that calculation for you. And then you can use it's, even for what if analysis. So, okay, if I do this, what is the long term, reduction of emissions and things like that. So as a tool, it's really, really great. But I think what's quite a fun story to share, it actually started more as an internal tool, just for us to make sense of our own emissions. So we're using a normal Salesforce instance with quite a bit of customization. Um, and over time, we're like, well, this is fantastic. It can really help others. So this is essentially how it became a product.
yes. It's a net zero pipeline, and yes, because again, perhaps if people not using Salesforce, it's a sales funneling tool to help you narrow down all your opportunities until you obviously hopefully win them. And you can do the same with your net zero target. In simple terms, I guess you could create a pipeline of, in quotes, opportunities to
Yeah,
move
and
towards net zero, and now it's turned into a product in itself.
I guess another thing to keep in mind with Salesforce is it's essentially a platform where you can customize quite a lot. So maybe
Mm.
your objects and how they relate to each other and what you do with that. This is quite easy. So again, if you're a Salesforce administrator role, of course you can do more fancy stuff if you're a developer and so forth. But again, there's quite a lot you can do just via customization out of the box. So this
Yeah.
is why we have, let's say, manufacturing cloud, health cloud. They're all built on the core Salesforce, but then they've been tailored for specific use cases. And that's, I guess, similar to Net Zero as well. It's more, okay, what are the objects or the things that really make sense to report on or we want to capture?
So then you finding talking to your customers about MuleSoft that it's actually the tool itself, or the products itself, platform I should say, actually fosters stronger business relationships, so, but with your own suppliers and customers. It creates that opportunity.
Yeah. So again, one of the huge advantages of Salesforce. As you might know, we over the past few years have made a number of acquisitions. Of course,
Yeah.
MuleSoft is one, Tableau, Slack, and so forth. So, something that I find really impressive as well is our constant, well, I guess, reinvention in the sense. Okay, so we have this amazing set of tools. How do we
Yeah.
make the best of them? So, for example, something like Slack is super easy, very intuitive, connects whole host of different audiences. So, coming back to okay, MuleSoft can help getting the data into Salesforce. Yes, there's a supplier portal, maybe engaging with your suppliers, but if it's actually working with different teams, so how does Slack come into the picture then? How do you set automated workflows, or
Yeah.
how can people take it off and chats? So it's really like how do you use all the different components to really actually help and accelerate change?
Fantastic, yeah. Because actually that leads us on to because the sort of the good news story from the purely the technology and sustainability point of view is that even though cloud systems consume a lot of electricity, if companies make more and better use of technology, that does actually it's even with the electricity, you're still moving closer to net zero than if you did nothing.
And another thing that's really important to differentiate one is how our technology helps with sustainability use cases. So this is things like, as we were just talking about, net zero. So
Yeah.
carbon reporting, maybe it's ESG visibility, or understanding your supplier credentials. Are they ethical? Are they, slave trade free, etc., etc. But the other aspect or the other side of the coin is the tech that we have. How can you design, build, operate in a greener way? So those are like, so when I talk about sustainability, I usually break it down in those two big camps because I think depending on what the customer's after, right? Sometimes it is more the business saying, this is what we want to do. Can your technology help? So again, just some really exciting examples out there. Unilever wants a deforestation-free supply chain. So, they're using satellite imagery and AI, and that solutions of Google. So that's one really cool example. That's a use case you can solve with tech. But then the other side of the coin is okay, we're going to run these workloads in the cloud. It's of course having a real impact. It's there's a cost associated with it. So is there something we can do to reduce it? So again, one really easy example to think here, and again, it's just quite I guess nascent in its own way. But batch processes, do they have to run a certain time of the day? Or could they run when there's a peak in renewable energy or there's a peak in solar energy? And just to make applications a bit more carbon aware. So there's some really exciting work that the Green Software Foundation are spearheading around this. It's like, well, how do you actually make software a bit more in tune with what's happening with the natural cycles of the earth? And this is where I've taken a lot of inspiration as well. It's like, well, what does that mean for MuleSoft? Can we tell our customers to do or run their application a certain way that will actually, the, the the whole purpose of this is to reduce your absolute emissions, right? or to get more work out for every kilowatt hour as well. So it's like, how do we do that? Because it can't just be operate as usual. We fundamentally do have to change how we design, operate, and run our applications and systems.
Yes, yeah, yeah. We talked about this in the previous podcast as well. The cool thing is, it's no one's necessarily got all the answers. You just have to really sort of chip away at these things. Again, the Salesforce sort of pipeline analogy, net zero analogy is a good one. You could have hundreds and hundreds of possibilities, and then you just got to sort of, as long as you're heading in the right direction, that's the main thing to start with. It's not as if you have to come up with the grand plan, and then once you've figured out how to actually do it in one fell swoop, then you start. You just keep going, and like as you say, just reorganizing batch processes. If everyone did that in the world, that would just be a staggering amount of electricity consumption saved. That's not even really thought about before.
And exactly, it's very much an iterative process, and you just got to start, because again, you don't know what's going to work or the impact it's going to have until you try it. And that's
Yes.
kind of mentality we've adopted internally as well. It's like, hey, we've just looked at these, let's say, sustainable development practices. Let's apply a couple, have a way to track the metrics or to see the impact. And then we ourselves are starting to understand, okay, actually doing this does have, the biggest, let's say, impact. So for our own learning, we can say, if you do anything, this is the one that's going to have the biggest impact. So again, it's that iterative process, not being afraid to get stuck in, and it's trial and error. Because as I said, it's technology is quite abstract, and especially when you look at large
Yes.
distributed systems. So some of it's maybe in the cloud, some of it's maybe on-prem. You have all these kind of networking set up as well. How do you calculate if you do one thing somewhere, what is the overall impact, right? It's a bit of an art and a bit of a, a bit of experimentation. So it's just really trying things out and seeing what happens.
Yes, because the vision's there, isn't it? So we're all trying to get to the same point. So it's just a question of moving forward and just chipping away at it, as I said. So then that takes us back to the actually doing the job. And how do you see the job evolving? Because it's, in a way, thinking about net zero is very much aligned with what we so now know to be sort of what makes sort of good work, if you like, where you're aligned with a common vision, and yeah, you're sort of pushed out of your comfort zone as well, because you have to maybe doing what you're doing now, you end up standing up on the stage and talking about it and things like that. So we're all pushed into all these things. That's good. That's good for it's good for your career, but it's also good. It makes what makes you feel good after you've done it. So how do you see that playing out over the coming years as we all work in this direction?
I think from a day-to-day perspective, be it you're a developer or an architect, or another kind of role, doesn't necessarily have to be in the IT team. I think you will see sustainability being a much bigger theme. So, as one example, AWS, so Amazon, Microsoft, loads of these big cloud providers have now added sustainability as a pillar in their well architected frameworks. So if you're an architect a couple of years ago, you may be balancing cost and efficiency and other non functional requirements and seeing how best to um, create a solution for the specific problem. But now sustainability adds another lens. So all of a sudden, you have to consider all of these different elements to make the best solution possible for the planet, and treat it as a
Yeah.
key stakeholder instead of just business, or the customer being a stakeholder. And I think that's really, really exciting as well. And even from a let's say team social perspective, this is something that I've seen a couple of my colleagues do, and it's always gives me a little giggle. So, of course, going for a meal, and depending what you choose, can have, again, a real impact. So, again,
Yes.
I know red meat and meat itself can have quite a heavy associated footprint. So, is it really that bad if every now and again, if you're going for a meal, it's a plant based meal? And one of my friends, when I was working in the UK office, she actually organized a team event and didn't tell anyone that it's a plant-based restaurant because, again, you couldn't tell. They're really inventive how they put things together.
Yeah.
And again, it was almost experiment to see if people, one, will notice what's actually in the food, but two, also how they feel about it. So I think you'll see a lot more things like that. And again, end of the day, I don't want to tell you can't do this, you should do this. It's just all about awareness. Um, it's just exploring what it's like. So again, it's not going to happen over day. You're going to be perfect, today as opposed to yesterday. But it's just that slow evolution. So even for your own, like, for me as well, I'm constantly learning. So what can I do more in my day to day? What can I do more in work? And you can slowly, slowly, slowly see these ideas permeate through the wider organization. So even if we have to go to a customer workshop, there are questions. What's the greenest way to get there? Do you really have to be there? How do we make the most of that time? So I think to answer your question, we'll see people being a lot more aware, but also know what they should and shouldn't do. So again, interesting or like a really easy thing that straight away comes to my mind. So when supermarkets said, you're going to have to pay for plastic bags, it massively changed the behavior of society, of
Yes.
customers, right? So I think it's a similar thing. Like once you see all these signals and you're perhaps encouraged to do things or it just makes sense, you'll see behavior changing throughout organizations as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I find now going do a lot of working from home, but and it's very very nice to meet. I'm working with a network of different companies. It's very very nice to meet up, but you only really need to do that say once, or it would be lovely to meet all the time. But if someone is, if I'm living in the south, someone else is living in Scotland, and we're all dotted around all over the country, it really makes very little sense for 10 people from different places to come together for one meeting, perhaps
Yeah.
once, because it just helps break the ice. But after that, it's you think, well, in the past I wouldn't have thought about it, but now you think, well, hang on a minute, let's this an expensive, not just an expensive in terms of money, but an expensive environmental sort of meeting, if you like, if we do this too often.
And exactly it, right? I think a lot of people don't always know what each action means from a environmental perspective. So, as an example, I read How Bad Are Bananas? And it looks at the carbon footprint of everything.
Right.
And really simple things like seasonal food. Again, in the UK, you're quite spoiled because you can get berries any time of the year. But
Yeah.
actually, having blueberries air freighted from Peru is really, really intense on the planet. So then,
Yeah.
even just shifting towards, okay, I will buy frozen ones and being aware of that change. And again, it doesn't really make that much of a difference to me. But all of a
No.
sudden, you're like, oh, I just didn't think about it.
Yeah. So there'll be many many things in every year that goes by. There'll be something we'll look back on and think, oh crumbs, I can't believe yeah, we used to worry about things like that. And it is interesting, like you say, when people, it's just the mindset, and suddenly it changes, and you can't believe you ever thought that, like you say, where you got stressed out because the supermarket had run out of something, and suddenly it's just, some of these things are just not that important now when it's presented to you in the context of the environmental side of it. And I think there's also that sustainability point of view with work as well. We can all do our jobs sort of during the day, whereas in the past we would all kind of wear each other out by exhaustive amounts of traveling for no real reason other than that was just what everybody did. And now it's companies are really questioning it. And then, for example, even when you've got sales opportunities, you really have to have qualified that opportunity before you actually go out and visit the customer and spend money and spend money on fuel and things like that, when it just isn't necessary. And it might it might be something that just isn't for now anyway. So if you don't go, you haven't wasted a trip. And I'm seeing that in the companies I deal with. They really want to know, they know, am I interested in this particular technology or not? Otherwise, let's just move on. That's how I work with them. But I notice it comes very, very quickly now, whereas in the past there'd be much more of a push to keep going and to arrange face-to-face visits and everything like that. Where now they just want to know straight away, is this happening or not? And it's a much better way of conducting business.
There was another point in the book around how a company was asking this, I guess, carbon consultant what they should do, whether they should have paper towels in the toilet or, uh, electric hand dryer. And he turned around and said, "You you should just not fly everywhere every week like your entire company flies across the globe to meet people face to face. Like if you change something, you should change that."
Yeah, fascinating. Yes. Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great. I do like. I was very happy to get a good book recommendation. So thanks for that. Okay, so I think that's a good place on a good note on which to end. And thanks very much, Tereze, for the book recommendation. And so, what is the best way of if people want to reach out to you at MuleSoft and to discuss sustainability? What's the best way of making contact with you?
Of course, you can find me on LinkedIn. Tereze Gaille should be easy to find. And always happy to hear from like minded people. If there was anything that I talked about that piqued your interest, please do get in touch, and really happy to collaborate and chat further.
You can catch up on Series 2 on the BML Digital website or your preferred audio app. And we'll be back this time next month for the next episode. Thanks very much.